and welcome to Book of Leaves podcast. My name is Cara and I am your host. Thank you so much for joining me for episode 25 of Book of Leaves. If this is your first time listening or watching, thank you so much. My name is Cara, I'm the host of this show. I started it about a year ago, and basically most episodes I interview someone who's doing something good for the planet in some way, and we get to know them a little bit, learn from them, and take a leaf from their book to add to our own way of eco-friendly living, hence the name Book of Leaves. So hopefully every episode is something you can learn a little bit from. This episode I will of course be talking to Sinéad from Extinction Rebellion about BiaHero, which is a new food growing campaign. Before I get into that though, I just want to quickly apologise for the delay in this episode. I was supposed to release an episode last Monday, but I think the isolation blues just got to me a little bit. I just did not have the headspace to do any editing and had to take a little break from technology. But I'm back now, and I think I'm going to revert to my original. So I'll release an episode today and I'll release an episode next Monday, which I have recorded, very exciting. And then I'll go back to every 2 weeks, because even in lockdown when I have time, just editing takes so much time. And now that I'm on YouTube as well, as fun as YouTube videos are to edit, there's just so much time involved. So I'll go back to every 2 weeks there'll be an episode, and anyone watching on YouTube, you'll also see I have cut myself a fringe. So I'm having one of those lockdown experiences, but I'm still here in my dressing gown, barely leaving the house, and I hope you're all keeping well. So let's get into this episode with Sinéad. I know Sinéad through Extinction Rebellion. Didn't know her very well. There's a lot of people that you just see and you become quite familiar with to see, and you kind of know what roles they have in the movement and whatnot. But I knew she was starting this food growing campaign with a couple of other amazing people, and I wanted to record an interview with her and basically talk about growing your own food at home and where to start, especially for beginners. I'm also a beginner, so it's something that is important in regards to food security. So if anyone doesn't know what food security is, we mention it a little bit in this show. I'm going to read you the definition here real quick. Food security, as defined by the UN, means that all people at all times have physical, social and economic access to sufficient, safe and nutritious food that meets their food preferences and dietary needs for an active and healthy life. So that's what food security is talking about, and obviously there are threats to that, such as climate change, a growing global population, rising food prices, and other environmental factors all feed into basically that food security not being a security. It's kind of in danger. And something even like what's happening now, the coronavirus, thankfully we still have imports and exports going, but if for some reason we couldn't have imports coming in, what would we have to live on? You know, we talk about that in this episode, but I just wanted to give you a bit of a definition as to what food security was before we get into it. And this is jam-packed full of lots of solutions. So chatting to Sinéad a little bit before, I got to know her a little bit. We'll be jumping straight into the BiaHero campaign, but just so you know a little bit about Sinéad, she's from Dublin originally, and she basically was a student in Scotland doing a PhD in psychology. When being a broke student, she went vegetarian. It was only then that she started to realise her kind of environmental sparked up, I guess, and she realised the importance of organic food and the environment, and she started getting involved with permaculture and growing her own food, and she kind of took that on her travels, and then eventually she's now settled in East Clare, close to a Steiner school, which I didn't know about. Basically these schools that educate kids all around nature, which sounds amazing. So that's where she is at the moment. And then Extinction Rebellion, she heard of this campaign in the UK that were rising, and she knew that what's happening now, things weren't right and something needs to change, and that's why she joined Extinction Rebellion, and that's how I got to know her. Yeah, so basically we're going to get into this conversation, but make sure that you do stick around after for some little notes on what we talked about. And if you want to support this podcast, please rate or review it on whatever you're listening or watching it on. If you're on YouTube, you can do that as well, and subscribe. And if you'd like to support it, you could also donate to my Patreon. I have a Patreon. If you've got a few spare change to make a monthly contribution from anything from €1 up, you can. It would be greatly appreciated. It's all all on the website, bookofleavespodcast.com, and check me out on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, Book of Leaves Podcast. You'll find me there for updates on the podcast and sharing little tidbits of information and nice little visuals as we go through this crazy time. But thank you so much to everyone who's already supported the podcast, and don't forget to share this episode with a friend, especially if you know that they've got some time on their hands or they're interested in starting to grow their own food at home. But here you will now see myself and Sinead chatting over Zoom. Sinead's camera quality isn't perfect, but it doesn't matter. You can still hear her perfectly. And I'll catch you after the interview just for one or two quick updates. Okay, thank you so much, Sinead, for popping on, leaving your garden to come and talk to me about BiaHero and helping other people grow some food. Thank you so much.
Thank you for inviting me, and I'm delighted to speak about BiaHero.
Yeah, no worries. So I guess to jump straight in, you were one of a few people, I imagine, who've probably had this idea, and we of course know each other through Extinction Rebellion, who aren't so unfamiliar with campaigns like this where they're trying to like improve society and also upskill in ways that are beneficial to ourselves and the planet and everything. But why in particular is a movement like BiaHero needed? Why did it begin?
Yeah, I think, as you said, BiaHero, or I suppose this is a version of guerrilla gardening in a way. I have to admit that, although we call it, I suppose, community gardening, which it is as well. And we're very much encouraging people to just grow for the first time, even if it is at home. It doesn't necessarily have to be outside your own home. I suppose what we were really looking for was a project which we could do during the restrictions, during the COVID restrictions, So this kind of ticked a lot of boxes because we thought, it could help people, outside ourselves. We'd be learning some things, you said, upskilling. We'd be kind of relaxing and connecting with nature, and, I don't know if I think you're doing a bit of gardening yourself, Cara, but yourself, just touching the soil and getting your hands kind of there and connecting with the plants, it is a stress relief. So all those things. And then I suppose, very much through Extinction Rebellion, we wanted to highlight the food security issue that we have in Ireland. So those were all the reasons behind the campaign, really.
And for any listeners who don't know, what is the food security issue we have? Because I've really only learned about it recently. I'm thinking, I don't know what you're talking about. We grow our own food. We've got turnips, potatoes. What's this food security stuff? So would you be able to explain that?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's true. A lot of people won't realize, because we do actually export more food than we import. So it might look like, we're self-sufficient in food, but we're not. We import like hundreds and thousands of tons of vegetables into this country. We don't even have enough seed in this country to feed ourselves. Like, there's so many issues with it. Most of our exports are in beef and dairy, but we're not really given over to horticulture in any way. So we don't grow our own grains. We import most of our grains from the UK. And I think the COVID situation, people kind of started to realize, even though we didn't really run out of food, people did start to kind of go, hang on, this is possible. It is possible that the supply chains could be weak, especially if there was an even worse crisis than the COVID crisis, as in the one that we are actually facing, which is the climate change crisis. So, it's a really important issue to highlight. So, we thought the first step is just making people aware that we can grow food in Ireland. We actually can. Irish ground is perfect for it. Like, it's so fertile. We could potentially be self-sufficient in our own food, but we're not. We're miles away from it.
Yeah, and I'd say, I mean, a huge portion of that is probably the fact that so much of our land is used for animal agriculture, because it's a huge portion of our income. And then also all our small scale farms and everything have gone, and like our own knowledge that, our grandparents would know about growing your own food. We're just so used to buying it in supermarkets without even thinking that nearly everything we're buying is probably coming from overseas instead of local. Because we also want everything that is probably seasonal, like strawberries, for example, which are only grown in the summer, and we want them all year round. So obviously they're grown from outsourced. So I'd say it's time and demand that basically, if God forbid something happened to our supply chain, what would we be living off here if we couldn't grow our own food? But
I think the vegans would be really upset anyway, because beef and dairy is pretty much what we have. But there's loads of information now to tell us that this is not a sustainable sector, not even financially. I actually live on a farm here in Clare. My house is like a rented house, but the farm, I live on a farm, let's say, that is actually a working farm. And the poor farmer, like, I feel for him, desperately. Like, the price of beef is not very good at the moment, and they're barely earning a living. It's more like they're on the dole, really. Like, this payment that they get is kind of like that'd be a second payment. Most of them have full-time jobs as well as work in the farm.
yeah.
So it's really not sustainable, and it's not sustainable in terms of emissions. The emissions from beef and dairy they're way too high compared to especially organic farming. If you're organically farming food produce like vegetables, even spuds grow really well. Broad beans you never see in Ireland, and they grow so well here. So it needs to transition, really.
Yeah, and I think, like, hopefully in future we'll see the government giving farmers kind of more subsidies and grants to pull them into more sustainable. It's an enjoyable kind of thing and it helps your mental health when you do have your hands getting dirty. Literally, there's mental benefits there. So I guess to start back to BiaHero, and for people like myself who've never actually grown food, I might, help weed the garden sometimes with only weeds that are killing other plants. I try to leave it alone as much as possible. So my garden experience is very minimal, but I've never grown food before. Aside from having one apple tree that I got from my communion and sticking that in the ground, like, my experience is nothing. So I literally have no idea where to start. So for people from house to apartments, what do you need? Where do you get your seeds? Where do you get the soil? What do you plant it in?
Yeah, it's I just want to clarify, I am not an expert gardener. I'm not, and I think that's one of the reasons we set up the BiaHero Facebook community page, because there are loads of people out there with loads of experience, and the idea would be that if you have any questions at all, you can come and you can ask those questions there, and the kind of more experienced people will answer. But I've been growing now for, I suppose, 7-ish years, and to be honest, my partner, he used to be the head gardener at Seed Savers, and he's pretty good. I think he's good. I shouldn't big him up too much, but he has been organic gardening for like over 20 years. Like, he's doing it before people even heard of it. So I shouldn't be bigging him up too much. But anyway, I think he's brilliant.
He deserves it. It sounds great.
I know, he's great. He helps me a lot, because he's still a gardener, so he'll come by with plants and stuff, and he'll help me to kind of decide where to put it. But to answer your question, I suppose, where do I get my seeds at Irish Seed Savers. It's only down the road for me. I actually volunteer there as well, when it isn't COVID.
Sure.
I volunteer there once a week, so I would be a loyal customer there. But they are particularly, I suppose, ethical, because it's an organic farm. It's all very like low intensity. They take care of the soil for the future generations is what they're thinking of. So that's where I would buy my seeds. But there are some other. I would really try and buy the organic open pollinated seeds, as opposed to some of what you buy in the garden shops are F1, and those are seeds that you can save your seeds from. Those are seeds that we don't have any control over. I suppose we don't have any sovereignty.
You were talking about F1 and pollinator. See, what's the difference? So you can save your seeds from one. Why is that?
Yeah, so they're actually, I suppose, manufactured, and they're kind of interbred. So if you grow your seeds after you've harvested what you want, you can save some seeds afterwards. And if you've grown open pollinated seeds, in other words, seeds that have been pollinated by insects, usually, or the wind or whatever, then you would be able to save that seed, and then you'd have seed yourself for next year. So it gives you an awful lot of empowerment. Whereas if you were to buy, F1 seeds and you actually save that seed, one, it mightn't grow into anything, or two, it might, give you something that you don't want, or doesn't taste good or whatever. But the seeds basically from an F1 won't be true to the parent plant.
And so where do you get, if you have seeds that you've ordered, I think Seed Savers do online shipping.
Yeah, they've just reopened. Yeah.
So where do you have to buy your soil? Should you get some if you're in an apartment? Should you get some from a local park? Should you start inside or outside?
Yeah, good question. It depends on what you want the soil for. So like I personally would buy, potting compost, and I would make sure that it's peat free, because we want to, take care of the bog. So you definitely don't want peat in your soil.
Okay.
If you want to be ethical, and it grows perfectly well. So there's absolutely no reason to buy soil with peat in it. So please, I would recommend making sure it's peat free. And I buy organic as well. It's not usually more expensive. But that's just what I look for. So you would want to sow your seeds in the compost that you buy usually. If you it depends on the seeds, I suppose, and it depends on the time of year, but I'd say it's pretty much a must, for your first time gardening. And especially if you're gardening indoors, you'd want your potting compost, because that would be very fertile. The rest is very much, it depends on what you're growing. You need your seeds, you need your compost, maybe a few pots or something. Now you can make your own pots or something if you want, out of like yogurt cartons or anything, as long as you put holes in the bottom to let the water out. Preferably put a plate underneath that pot. You would need good sunlight, so you do need, plants will not grow without sunlight, so you'll definitely need something like that. And I suppose, it just depends on your own space. There's as many ways to garden as there are hairstyles, or
Sure.
ways to build a house, or it's really a personal thing.
And because I've seen a lot of people's Instagram stories now, because I guess it's spring and a lot of people are starting to grow things and become more aware, and everyone's spending time at home, and they are starting with little seedlings inside, and then if they have a garden, they're potting them into something bigger or into the ground. Why do people do that? Why do people start in in small little trays and then move them?
Yeah, well, the reason I would start them in small trays kind of gives you more control over where they grow. So is one reason. Another reason is if you plant it straight outside, sometimes you might get rodents that would eat them, or there are other things like certain insects or larvae that will eat them as well. Now there are some things that I do sow outside, but the other reason for sowing inside is it kind of gives you a head start, because if you use potting compost and your inside's going to be a bit warmer than outside, so your seedlings will often germinate quicker. So it just gives you that maybe 1 or 2 weeks kind of advance, so you can kind of make more use of the growing season.
Okay. And is there a specific window? I presume the growing season we're probably in right now. So should people kind of get a move on the food that they grow? Is there a bit of an urgency about it?
Yeah, you want to be, I mean, you'll get away with some things later on, but yeah, you want to, it's a great time to be sowing seeds right now. I mean, just being, honest about it, if you're a first time gardener as well, people do buy, you can buy, especially if your seeds get eaten or your plants die and everything. Look, don't feel guilty about going to the garden shop and buying a few, you can buy kind of ready-made plants. Yes, it's not as probably ethical or as ideal, but look, especially if you can buy them organic, then, there's no problem. It's just that it's very hard to get them all organic, that won't have used any kind of artificial fertilizers or even sprays or whatever. So I don't know, I rambled there, sorry.
No, not at all. It's good to know that if you're under a bit of time pressure and you've no idea what you're doing, that you're able to go into a garden center and not feel so guilty about it, because we're all learning, and I guess that's most important thing. In regards to, I guess, there's just so many different types of veg and types of fruit that we can all grow. So, and you said there that there's as many different ways to garden as well. So we won't get too specific with certain kind of foods because we'll be here for hours otherwise, but are there any good resources that you know of? I know we've mentioned the Facebook community group for BiaHero, so that will all be linked in the comments underneath or in the show notes for this episode. But are there any other good resources you know of for people wanting to grow specific veg or fruit and knowing how to do that and how to look after them?
Well, actually, yes, somebody mentioned a book there on the Be a Hero community. I can't remember what it is called, but it is specifically for Ireland. So that's just one thing to be careful about. It's the same with the seeds. If you buy seeds that were produced in Ireland, you're much better off than buying, some of the brands that could be produced in other countries, because the seeds that are produced in Ireland, for example, from Seed Savers, I know I'm rattling on about them a lot, but it is, they are, suited for the Irish climate. So if you look through that catalogue and just get ideas, so they have an actual catalogue with lovely pictures in it, and, you can kind of decide what you want. But, something that I find, what makes me decide which veg I'm going to grow in my garden is, I have a fantastic organic grower that I buy my vegetables from, out of season or whatever. And I'll buy from him some vegetables all year round. But what I tend to do is I grow the vegetables that he would use plastic for. So, for example, he would put his kale and his salads inside plastic, because he has to keep them fresh. And those are the things I would choose, and also things that aren't so common. So like, he'll have the spuds, he'll have the carrots, and I'll grow a few of those just, for the taste, because it's nothing like the pleasure of growing your own. But he would be my main supplier. I wouldn't grow most of them, but whereas I would focus in on peas, because they're quite expensive, and beans as well, because they're just beautiful and they grow, really well. But it's really hard to buy Irish beans, so that's what I, judge is what is hard to get, what is hard to get organically, or what normally comes in plastic, and I could avoid it. So but everyone's different.
That's a very good place to start. And one thing that we mentioned that I actually forgot to ask, how do you save seeds? Because I've never grown something, harvested, and then saved a seed. So for a beginner, like, where do you find that seed? Is it like the seeds that you'd actually find in the food and then that's what you save?
Saving seed is, I'm still learning how to do it. It's, it's something that you learn. Same with all parts of gardening. It took me, a few years before I started really producing food, by myself. So don't feel bad if stuff doesn't work out, and don't expect to know everything. Saving different seeds, you save different ways. I'm trying to think. So normally, like, you would actually let the food go, like, instead of harvesting it when it's, kind of ripe, you would let it go on a bit to save the seeds out of it. So you might, some people grow extra, like, just to save seed. They'll grow, like, I think I read it actually on the Be a Hero community today. Someone said she grows, one for the slugs, one for herself, and one to save seeds, so it's, you kind of count it in when you're planting your seedlings out. Yeah, you usually let the plant go very, very ripe, and then different plants will have different ways of saving seeds. For example, tomatoes would be, very different than beans, or, cucumbers, or whatever. So it's just, I suppose, just keep an eye on the community, and we'll kind of probably have different tutorials as the seeds are ready to save, so yeah,
And there's probably YouTube videos out there for whatever specific thing you're growing as well. And is there anything that you can kind of grow all year round? Is there things that you can be planting kind of all year round if you miss the warm kind of window?
Yeah, so radishes are really easy to grow outdoors. They're really fun for kids, even though they might not always eat them, but they're so much fun because they're so colorful, and you can eat the leaves and you can eat the radish, and they're really lovely and fresh and crispy and juicy. They have a very long growing season for outdoors. Now, a lot of people, if you start to get serious and you discover you got the green fingers, you might get a polytunnel, and that way you could produce food all year round, like lettuces, or you know, a good one to grow actually at the moment. I have purple sprouting broccoli seeds, and if you sow those now, there's something called a hungry gap, which is kind of after you've harvested everything. That's when your purple sprouting broccoli actually is available. Then it's ready to harvest kind of after everything else. And there's just this period before you start to get the next year's harvest, and after you get the last year's. And purple sprouting broccoli is a brilliant one, so highly recommend it.
That's really cool. So what happens, I presume, when people start growing their own, some people might grow a lot of one specific thing. How do you find people to share your food with? This is something you can probably post into the Facebook group as well. But I imagine that's usually what happens when you have a surplus of something, you swap it with your neighbors who have kale, and you get kind of a variety that way. Is that the kind of norm when you start growing your own food and creating that kind of community?
Exactly, yeah, there's a real community to it. And I'm glad you mentioned kale there as well, because that's another great one to grow. It has a really long growing season. It's such a great plant for Ireland. It's so hardy, you know. And I just, one other story that like I would be a big fan of biodiversity, obviously, and when I see the caterpillars come and start to eat my my brassicas, would be the cabbages or the broccolis or whatever, I tend to leave them there, and they still survive. It's amazing. So anyway, yeah, kale is another good one. It's just a lovely thing when the harvest comes. I mean, two things is, one, you share food with your neighbors. It's beautiful. It's that time of Lunasa in Ireland, so you really are much more connected to the seasons, I think, when you're growing as well. But then the other bit is you kind of learn the preserving methods. So you learn fermentation and sauerkrauts and all those kind of things, and how to keep things long, or I suppose if you have a freezer, but just how to preserve food,
Yeah.
pickling and things like that as well.
Yeah, that comes into it as well, of course, like thinking of how to make things last. And there's also shops out there, maybe local markets. I don't know if you don't know anyone growing in your community. For anyone listening, there are shops. I know, for example, there's a place called Small Changes in Drumcondra in Dublin, and if you have any extra organic veg that you're growing at home or herbs, you can bring them there and they'll give you store credit in return. So there's also kind of options like that for people out there if you don't know anyone that you can swap with and you're drowning in kale. So there's definitely options out there. And we talked a little bit about caterpillars and stuff there. Obviously, we want to avoid using pesticides. We want to grow organic, and we want to kind of grow our food alongside nature as opposed to taking from it. So have you any tips for people on how to do that? The only thing I kind of heard about is to feed the bugs in your garden with other flowers, with diverse flowers, so that they're not going to your veg. So if you have a diverse garden, it shouldn't be a problem. But have you any other kind of tips or suggestions around that?
Yeah, exactly. As you said, the more diversity that's in your garden, the more it kind of takes care of itself. And you've got the circle of life, and you will get a few things given over to slugs, but sure, slugs are important, so it's grand. I don't get too upset about it. Yeah, the other thing that I would recommend is getting to know your garden, getting to know the little wild plants. So the things that you start to call weeds, just have a closer look. And I'd say I'd be surprised if you didn't start to see the beauty in them. I suppose you actually start to find out about them, medicinal properties, even the likes of calendula, which, I would use in creams, and, yarrow or nettles as well. I pick the nettles and I would make a compost tea with them and comfrey. So it's really useful to have as much biodiversity in your garden for yourself as well as for all the creatures and everything.
Definitely. And do you need a huge patch of land to do this kind of stuff? Like, what kind of size of earth are you looking at, from sales to gardens? What do you need land wise?
Anything. I think there's a lot of creativity out there now at the moment about using space, and especially using the height. So I saw a picture there today of someone who had the herbs kind of grown in a stacked kind of pot like up on their wall. So yeah, you can, like, it is harder, and I feel really sorry for the people who don't have any gardens at all. Yeah, one of the we were thinking of a name for our campaign, BiaHero. One of the potential names was Slawn to the Lawn, which I loved, because I think that captures something important as well. You know, you might have a lawn, if you're not using it, like, I mean, I have a bit of lawn for my kids to run on, you know, we play a bit of football on it or whatever. But if you're not actually using the lawn, like, consider like just giving over a small patch, and just I would even say, you know, start small is better, and get, you know, one little patch going, you know, plant a few spuds, just, you know, one kale plant, you know, anything, just very, very simple. And then if that goes well, you know, expand the next year, the next year, the next year. So there's no need to have anything big. Probably the smaller the better at the start.
Yeah, because there's a lot of people have those tiny little front lawn patches that are literally just sitting there beside the car. No one's ever on them anyway, so that's a good place to start. Even in your parents' home or something, once after the lockdown, if you can get to them, that maybe you can start there. What else? Oh yes, so for people who, I used to live in an apartment where, I mean, I had a tiny balcony, but we actually had someone send in a question to be asked. A friend of mine, Erin, wanted to know, she has a windowsill. That's all she has. It gets sunlight. What can someone with just a windowsill grow? Are there any tiny little kind of greens or anything that you can grow on just a windowsill in little pots?
Yeah, I think herbs are very giving. I would probably grow herbs if I couldn't grow anything else. Try a few, like a bit of rosemary, a bit of thyme. I've never tried radishes, but maybe you know, maybe you could, you know, kind of make a little kind of row, like if you made a long sort of, and like kind of got one of those, a bit like a window box, I suppose,
Yeah.
but you put it indoors. Now make sure you put something underneath it or you'll ruin your windowsill. And yeah, like radishes would be great. Like, you know, radishes grow really well. Like, so that would be something. Yeah,
Yeah.
radishes and herbs. Maybe even a few salads. If you have a lot of light, you might have luck with salads. It's worth a try.
And how do you nourish the soil?
It depends on the plant. Some plants are, you know, hungry feeders, and some plants aren't. Now, it's just something has just popped into my head there. The other year, like a couple of years ago, I think when we first moved into this house, my then 5-year-old son naughtily planted a bean in one of my flower pots, and I didn't know about it until this kind of thing popped up. And when beans pop up, they kind of pop up quite big. I was like, what's that? You know, and he's like, and he guerrilla gardened my my flower pot. And anyway, you know, it was kind of fun. So we let the bean grow up, and it was really hot that year. And it actually grew out the window because we had the window open, and it grew all the way up, like the top of, you know, all pretty much up to my bedroom window. It was great crack, you know. So maybe you could even try, you know, doing a few climbers out your window if you're if you're
And
very
add to the
ambitious.
decor as well. That's brilliant.
Yeah.
I love that. And actually, that's something we never really talked about, is the kind of guerrilla side of it. So I guess guerrilla, for anyone who might not know, is kind of doing something without permission, but it's not that bad of a thing usually. Like guerrilla, you might hear of people guerrilla flyering, where they'll go and stick up flyers, or guerrilla filming. Production companies will film on a street without asking any permission. So guerrilla gardening, I presume it's when you find somewhere that it isn't kind of being looked after. It's a patch of land that is just being grown, and you plant stuff there. So has there been much action there with people growing food in kind of unsupervised areas that are council owned or whatever? How do you kind of go about that if that's up your street?
You could do it if there was nobody tending the space. I would say, you know, if you see a plant pot, put one in there, put a label on it, take a photo, tend it. You know, you could do that. But if it's a place that is taken care of, maybe connect with the locals, connect with the people there, and, you know, work with them. But I'd say, you know, if you get the courage, go for it. Go and plan things out in the community. It's really worth it.
Yeah, it is nice when you see food grown outside, I think. It reminds you of where it comes from, because there's a huge kind of cognitive dissonance going on between ourselves and where food comes from and the work that goes into it. And it also means that you might create less food waste too.
You asked me a question about that a minute ago, which I didn't answer fully. I think you were asking about what nutrition do the plants need, and
Oh,
that's
yeah.
it's a really important question, because you know what they need is the compost, is your food waste. So, I mean, the thing is, so when we talk about waste, we mean stuff that is thrown away and not used at all. Whereas when you're talking about the food, your leftovers, your breakfast crusts, or whatever you have, the peelings from your potatoes, even better, or all that stuff that goes in your compost bin is extremely nutritious for the plant. So that's what I would love to see happening as well, is people understanding that stuff is gold. Like, you can actually turn that, all you need is like a bit of heat, just keep it in your compost bin, have some kind of place. Like, you could just use one bin. You can put like holes in the side. I've put holes in the side of my bin, and just layer it with cardboard and maybe paper or something, if you have grass clippings, that as well. And voila, you will have extremely nutritious feed for your plants. Probably more so outside maybe, but it could be used indoors as well. If you composted it down well enough, you could actually use that indoors as well.
Yeah. Do you need to, so the holes in the side are to aerate it. Do you need to like mix it up every so often, or will it just kind of break down itself?
You could, if you wanted to go, it will eventually just break down itself, but if you want to speed up the process, it does help to turn it. I think we need to do a nice tutorial on composting, actually. I don't want it to be, I think there are loads of different ways to do composting. You could buy things for it, but really don't have to spend money on it if you don't want to.
Yeah, I was thinking as much. And is there anything that you just need to avoid? Are you able to put animal products? I know you can use like eggshells if you have eggshells at home, but do you have to avoid meat and dairy and that kind of stuff? Is it just kind of veg mostly we're looking at?
A lot of people will have just raw compost, and that will break down quicker. But personally, whatever I have, I will put in. It doesn't matter really if you do put meat or fish remains in, it will also compost. Some people actually would dig a hole and bury it in their garden, and that will make the soil very fertile as well. So you can do that too. So people talk about rodents, I suppose, and in a way it is possible that they will come. So it is better to try, and if you have a sealed container for a compost bin, then you're grand. If you have a compost bay like mine, like in a garden space, then maybe keep it a little bit away from the house. I mean, where I live, to be honest, rodents are completely impossible to avoid completely. But they don't really bother me because they're not in my house. They're over in the compost bay. They probably are there. So yeah, it's just part of biodiversity really for me, on a farm especially. Yeah,
I've heard there's other little tips as well, because I have a fish tank, and that with to rescue little goldfish in it, and apparently goldfish tank water or fish tank water, when you're doing cleans, because that all goes down the drain, apparently there's lots of nitrates in the water that can be nutritious to soil as well. Try to think of ways that you won't waste water, like pasta water as well, when you're making pasta, little things like that you can save water as well, that they have little bits of food that are kind of nutritious for the soil. There's kind of like loads of little quirky things.
Speaking of nitrates, that's probably why your fish water is so good. It's probably because all the fish pee that's in it. So if you want to pee anywhere outdoors, pee on the compost heap. It's really good for a compost. So that's where all the nitrates come from. But yeah, I am really lucky as well. I've got there's somebody with a horse livery, like just maybe about a kilometer away from where I live, and I'll go there, and she lets me take manure as well. So yeah,
if you've got pet dogs or such at home, is that kind of a grey area?
That's a no actually.
Okay.
Yeah, so it would be animals that are grass fed, that manure is good. But if your animal is eating things like dog food and cat food and all that, you basically don't want your pet's poo anywhere near your garden. So
right, it's good to know. Okay, that's very good to know. I'm kind of thinking, like, we've covered a fair bit of kind of a broad thing. Oh, one little question as well that I had. Should you label when you're planting? What's the importance of labeling?
It's so important to label, and so many people don't. I definitely did not know about the labeling thing when I first started. And then you get all these things. You think you remember because you go, yeah, I'm going to put the peas in here and the beans in there and the carrots over there, and I'll know which is which, no problem. And then these things come up and you haven't a clue what it is. And it really matters because of spacing and where you're going to put it. And if it's a root, you'll definitely want to be putting it somewhere there's deep soil, or if it's something that can tolerate shade, so labeling when you sow the seeds is a really good idea. Definitely. Yeah.
Okay. I want to ask as well, if you start planting things outside, for the last couple of summers, of course, climate change means that we're getting these really hot summers. So how do you know if what you're growing needs water, needs help? Because obviously this is a very rainy country and we usually don't have that problem, but I know the last 2 or 3 summers there has been a bit of a dry spell. So I guess in anticipation of that, unfortunately, again, how can you tell your food needs help, and what do you do to help?
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up a dry spell there. I actually, it's a good idea to have something to harvest rain available. So you should be harvesting rain now, if you can, like even just a bin, like an open bin or whatever you have, the biggest container you can find, something that you can dip a watering can into and use. Also, you can push, I have just put, like I have like an open, that's what I use, is actually a bin as well, and like it's a clean bin, but it's I put nettles and dock leaves in it at the moment to make my compost tea. So when it rains on it, then I can dip out of that, and that will actually fertilize my plants. So you could be ending up watering your plants in the summertime. Anything in pots, that's the disadvantage of pots. If it's in a pot, it will definitely need water because it won't be able to stay moist. Whereas if it's in the ground, it's more likely to be able to stay moist, but you do have to keep an eye on it. If you start to see things like lettuces and things like that, like rocket or something, that's another one actually to grow on a windowsill, rocket. It's a nice one. That would very easily go to seed, and if as soon as it goes to seed, it doesn't taste as good. So that's a sign. If your plants are going to seed very quickly, that's a sign that they need water. If they start to flower, actually, I was really proud of my broad beans this year from my saved seed, and they've already started to flower. And I think it's because I think they got too dry. So what I've done now. I don't know if I'm going to get them back, but what I've done is I've mulched them with manure that I had, and I did give them a drink of compost tea, and I've just got my fingers crossed now and hope for the best. But yeah, definitely need to keep your plants moist, or they won't produce what you want them to.
I didn't know that about the flowering thing, so that's good to know that if they're flowering a bit too early. I guess, would they usually flower after you harvest them if you left them alone? Is that kind of what's supposed to happen, or?
No, the flowers are what eventually produce the fruit or the vegetable. So a lot of things, so for example, if you know of any apple trees, if you've still got your communion apple tree,
Yeah.
it should be blossoming around now, I'd say. And then after that, that's when the fruit will come, or the seeds. So it will go to flower before it goes to seed. But when the flowers come, the plant is actually putting its energy into the flower, and no longer into the leaves, so the leaves won't taste as good. So for me, beans, my bean plants could probably do it a bit stronger so that they can, support the beans that are potentially going to grow in them. So I'm hoping that they'll just grow up a bit more and get a bit thicker and stronger. If they go, if it goes to flower too early, the pods will form earlier as well for the beans, and they just mightn't be great.
Sure.
So fingers crossed that it'll all come together and
will be okay.
Yeah.
My last question on just growing things specifically: how do you know if something is going to need a support? How do you know if it's going to need a lollipop stick or something is there a general kind of know-how, or do you just kind of need to research that when you're planting the seed?
Well, peas and beans are, mostly climbers, unless they're a bush variety, and still I would probably put in a bit of support for them. A lot of things need support, like even tomatoes as well. I would put in a support for them. You would put a string underneath the plant and then tie it to something above and wrap it around the stem. So all these are, it is an individual thing, but something that doesn't need support would be salads or potatoes. Courgettes grow really well. They don't really need supports.
I don't think there's anything else. Like, I know there's so much information out there when it comes to gardening, what to plant, when to plant it, how much water it needs. So there's the Facebook group, the Bia community group. I'm going to link that. There's also a page. You're on Instagram. I think you're on Twitter as well. So that's how you can find the BiaHero campaign. And then there's also websites like the Pollinator Plan, Seed Savers, We Are the Ark. It's all kind of information that helps having a diverse garden to help with feeding critters so they're not eating your veg, but also the likes of Seed Savers knowing how to kind of take care of your seeds. Unless there's anything else that you want to let people know about BiaHero.
I'm thinking of one more thing actually that's coming up for me, Cara. So I'm just thinking, it is for a lot of people, it's their first time growing food this year, and they mightn't actually feel confident enough to be planting it out in the community yet. I think that's the case for a lot of people. They want to see what happens at home, what happens on their windowsill, what happens if they say slaw to the lawn and they decide to, put a few veggies in there instead. And, maybe I suppose now it's good to start planning for next year. So it's just finished now. It's not time for planting trees anymore. Tree planting season is just finished this month. So you always plant trees with a month with an or in it. Yeah, did you not know that?
No, I didn't know that.
Yeah, it's a nice one, isn't it? Yeah. I only learned it a few years ago. So, it could be a great time for planning, a community orchard or a community garden. I got growing, it's through a community allotment, and it's such a great way to meet people and learn skills. And you have the older, more experienced people, and then the newbies, and it's just a great combination. So even if you're not going to plant seeds and grow for the community this year, it's a good time to start making a plan, getting people together, and decide if there's a nice site that would look good with a few apple trees that you might hang out under and have a little picnic or whatever. So
yeah, that's lovely. Like some planning for
it.
next year for sure, and it's something that you can spend your time with. And I guess one final little thing, it can be related to BiaHero or not, just from you personally. I know you're involved a lot with the empathy circle in XR. Have you got any kind of tips or advice for people at this time, just in general, being at home with everything that's going on in the world?
Yeah, gosh, it is a tough time for people, and especially people who are really isolated and cocooning. And I received a few packets of seeds in the post, and I've sent a few as well. So, I think the Compost campaign was lovely, so I think sending and receiving letters, especially to elderly people who are at home, or disabled people, and if you can pop something nice in to cheer them up, that's like a really good way. I suppose to just stay in touch. That's probably the hardest thing at these times, isn't it? It's just the lack of social contact. So
yeah,
and spend time in nature, as well. That is that's really important to relieve stress too.
For sure. Thank you so much, Sinead, for all of that. And hopefully I will see you in person soon.
Yeah. Thanks so much, Cara. That's really, really great. And I must.
That was Sinead. I hope you guys were able to take away something and learn something from that. It is quite beginner level information, but if you have any more questions, or even better, if you have experience that you can give to other people, please do join the BiaHero community Facebook group. And there's also a Facebook page, and it's just such a lovely place that you can comment in with questions or advice for other growers. There's also a lot of tutorials in there at the moment, so it really is a lovely page. And And don't forget to share this with a friend if they're having any trouble growing their own veg, and I'll share what I can on my social media platforms to help other people as well growing their own food. It's so exciting. And yeah, that is it. Don't forget to rate, review, subscribe. If you've any questions or queries about myself or the podcast, or suggestions for future episodes, or on format or anything, please do let me know. And aside from that, I hope you're all keeping as safe as can be, and I'm sending you a lot of love. I will see you next week for episode 26. We'll be talking to Fiona from All Things Fiona Lilly about rescuing clothes that are due to go to landfill, and I'm excited about that. So don't forget to listen back on other episodes as well, and stay safe. I'll talk to you soon. Bye.